Incense burning, all space is filled with the fragrance. All Buddhas smell it from afar. Auspicious clouds gather everywhere. With utmost clarity, all Buddhas appear. Pay homage and offer clouds of incense to the Bodhisattvas and the Mahasattvas. Pay homage and offer clouds of incense to the Bodhisattvas and the Mahasattvas. Pay homage and offer clouds of incense to the Bodhisattvas and the Mahasattvas. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Sunday Dharma Talk. I am substituting for Panyawati today. Panyawati has a retreat whose timing conflicts. Is that screen?
I'll turn it up. Thank you.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. Yeah. So Panyawati's at a retreat that conflicts with this time. So she asked me to give the Dharma talk today. So you have Dharma with Joe, which means if you've had past experience with Dharma with Joe, that means we're going to dive into the foundations of Buddhism, see what we can find. If you've attended any of my talks in the past, you might be aware that we took a broad brush at kind of the Eightfold Path last time and looked across the kind of the major tenets of Buddhism and brushed across it like that. And I noticed some time ago that I had this book by Tanisaro Bhikkhu, and he's someone who is a scholar. Bhikkhu Bodhi is another scholar who translates a lot of the teaching. So, for instance, when we do our Dharma contemplation, we prepare for that, we're looking for various suttas. We always have a choice between Tanisaro's translation or Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. This is a book that I picked up among a few others. There were some retreats a couple of years back. I think probably the first year I ever came. And some of the principles that were leading those retreats. Left a box of books here, and this was one of them, and there were a few others. And I bought them, and I was so early in the game that I bought them, put them on the shelf at home, never read them. And so I began to pick these up over the last few months, and I noticed in this book is called On the Path, and it's basically the Eightfold Path. So he treats each of the segments of the Eightfold Path in this book. And I noticed that the part on with right view was huge. I mean, compared to all the rest, it was a significant portion of the book. And so that led to the curiosity, why is that? Is there something special about right view? So for those that may not be familiar, the Eightfold Path in Buddhism stems from the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths state that, there is suffering, there is a cause of suffering. We're going to go into that a little bit today. There is the possibility to stop the suffering, and there is a path to do so. And that path is called the Eightfold Path. And so it goes that, in the path, we have three different sort of categories of factors, they call them. Wisdom is one, where we have right view and right intention. Virtue is another, where we have things like right speech, right action, right livelihood, and developing of concentration or meditation is another. And so you have things like right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration that fall into that category. And so these are the three sort of, aspects of probably any spiritual path, right? You've got your wisdom aspects, you've got your virtue, and you've got some means of trying to get at, what's going on in your mind. So I wanted to focus on right view today. And thanks to Tanisaro, because I used his section on right view for a great deal of my coming to some sort of an understanding of, what does right view mean to Buddhism?
So right view in this path is kind of the views and opinions, the teachings, and how we understand the path. What is it? Like, what do we believe? What do we understand?
And what do we do? And why? So it's all of that. In the beginning, I think, as we embark on kind of any spiritual path, we learn, study, listen, we kind of decide whether we believe them. And then, in the beginning, we repeat kind of as a matter of faith. We believe this is true. There's something here for me, and it's a path that I'm kind of interested in following. So that's kind of how we get started. And the view of that particular path is what's coming across right there. So it's where we start, and then eventually, maybe we gain some experience and begin to implement some of the teachings in our lives, and begin to have some kind of direct experience of our own, depending on the nature of the path. Buddhism, I find, is a experiential path. It's not just that there are volumes of teachings for us to consume and feel smart about. It's that the teachings are meant for us to walk out in our lives, and that eventually we begin to be able to sort of teach ourselves. Kind of that's the idea. It's at least the way I see it. So as I think we'll see, right view strikes me as kind of both a starting point, as I just described, but also an ending point in this particular Buddhist path. We'll see why that is, but it ends up to be kind of the forerunner of all the other factors in the Eightfold Path. Those are really kind of supporting the development of right view, as it turns out. And ultimately, we are starting with, belief and faith. We're working towards understanding and walking out some of this, gaining insights, having an understanding for ourselves, seeing how it plays out in our own life. This is modifying our view, right? The whole time it's modifying the view. The teachings are helping to sort of, modify our view. And then we're also modifying our own. We're seeing this play out in our own life. It looks different to me than it does to Sukha in the room here, my wife, Susan. So ultimately, the way it becomes the end of the path is that ultimately your view is like the Buddha had way back in the beginning. The Buddha had his enlightenment. And through that, he saw that, wow, as he looked around after he had this view of, this enlightened view, he kind of looked around and said, wow, all these people, all these beings are really suffering. They are trapped in this cyclic existence. They don't even know they're trapped. So the biggest problem I see is the suffering and the ignorance of the suffering. They don't know they're suffering. Therefore, they're just trapped in this vicious cycle of, going on for forever, the way it looks, without some intercession. And so ultimately, this view can, as it evolves, can take us all the way. Can take us all the way to the end of the path itself. So that's why right view is kind of foremost among the 8 factors, and the other factors, kind of supporting. So we can think about the Eightfold Path kind of as a map. And our ability to interpret the map correctly, read the map, is right view. The decision to follow the map would be right intention. If I said I needed to go somewhere I'd never been before, and I said I have a map and I decided to follow it, ordinary person would say that's wise. those two things, right view and right intention, are under the wisdom category of our path. The effort we make to read and follow the map is right effort. And keeping the map's instructions in mind as we're driving along or however we're traveling would be right mindfulness. So you see how the other factors in the path support us being able to sort of use this map. One of the things that I found interesting going into this was it became clear to me that the Buddha actually had a strategy for how we taught. That he taught different people, different things, and in different ways, depending on who they were. Now, certainly he had some very advanced students. He had monastics, but he also had lay followers. And he kind of taught them all differently. He seemed to have somewhat of a strategy. And there's actually a sutta that I'll share where you'll see that he talks directly about the two types of what he calls right view and how he teaches them. So that was pretty fascinating to me. I guess the other advantage that I see with Buddhism is that in the Buddha, we have someone who had an opportunity after his enlightenment to teach for 40 years or so, 40 or 45 years. You know, it strikes me also based upon, you know, what we're going to go through, we're going to see the different sort of levels of the view and how he taught. And nowadays, we have see all those books up there in the corner. We have all the suttas, we have the Pali Canon, we have all this information. We could pick up one of those books and end up in the middle of this thing, and maybe be lost because of it. But because the Buddha taught primarily verbally, when he had someone in front of him, he taught them what they should be taught. When he had someone else in front of them, he taught them what they should be taught. He had control over what he was teaching. And it's probably the reason that I'm just becoming aware that there's even kind of different levels of Buddhism in the Pali Canon, different levels of teachings that are useful to different people, depending on where they are. So 3 levels of right view. There's the mundane, the transcendent, and the final is kind of how they're categorized. So I'm going to read Buddha's description of the various factors of the Eightfold Path and kind of right view's place among them here in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is Sutta number 117, called the Great 40, for those that are interested. He says, therein, bhikkhus, right view comes first. How does right view come first? One understands wrong view as wrong view and right view as right view. This is one's right view. So right off the bat, you know, and I made the joke before when we, you know, in another talk, how if you take this path, you know, right view, right this, right that, and you bring it out into the world and put it on the 6 o'clock news, you'll start a war. I mean, what's right? You know, I'm right, you know. But the way this reads, but what I am starting to sort of, what he means by this is that one understands wrong view is wrong view and right view is right view. That's discernment. That's discernment. What he's relying on is that as you walk this path, you develop discernment. You develop the ability to tell the difference. And so that's, I guess, part of the reason I'm seeing that he can say it so blandly. In what bhikkhus is wrong view? There is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing sacrificed, no fruit or result of good and bad actions, no this world, no the other world, no mother, no father, no beings who are reborn spontaneously, no good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins in the world who have realized for themselves by direct knowledge and declare this world and the other world. This is wrong view. So he was contending at the time with a lot of different views from, you know, Eastern religion at the time, you know, India, views on whether, you know, you were annihilated after death, whether, you know, what happened to this thing, you know, after death. And there were so many different views. And so what he's doing there is refuting one of the common views at the time, And he's saying, that's wrong view. And he says, then what is right view? I say it's twofold. There is right view that it's affected by taints, partaking of merit, ripening in the acquisitions. And there is right view that is noble, taintless, supramundane, a factor of the path. And what bhikkhus is right view that's affected by the taints, partaking of merit, ripening in the acquisitions. There is what is given, what is offered, and what is sacrificed. There is the fruit and result of good and bad actions. There is this world and the other world. There is mother and father. There are beings who are reborn spontaneously. There are in the world good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins who have realized for themselves by direct knowledge and declare this world and the other world. This is right view affected by taints, partaking of merit, ripening in the acquisitions. And we're going to see how that translates to mundane, the mundane view for someone who's early on the path. And what bhikkhus is right view that is noble, taintless, supramundane, a factor of the path. The wisdom, the faculty of wisdom, the power of wisdom, the investigation of states. It's that discernment again, right? The path factor of right view in one whose mind is noble, whose mind is taintless, who possesses the noble path and is developing the noble path. This is right view that is noble, taintless, supramundane, and a factor on the path. One makes an effort to abandon wrong view and to enter upon right view. This is right effort. Mindfully, one abandons wrong view. Mindfully, one enters upon and abides in right view. This is one right mindfulness. Thus, these three states run and circle around right view. That is, right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. So you can see there that, you know, it's not just a scholar's view that there are different levels of teaching. This is literally a sutta where the Buddha describes that he has different ways of either teaching, or there are different ways of sort of utilizing Buddhism as a spiritual path. So the mundane, with the mundane level, which was described kind of in the first part there, the student is sort of being exposed and comes to some level of acceptance of rebirth and karma. Tanisaro stated that, you know, these teachings conduce to a favorable rebirth, but don't by themselves lead to transition, right? So we're dealing with people, the world, we're dealing with basic concepts like rebirth and karma, and we are going to emphasize, you know, abandoning unskillful actions and developing skillful ones. So you can see that smacks of kind of the beginning of a lot of spiritual paths or religions, right? Let's switch to another sutta here. Strangely, and I didn't know this, this sutta is called Right View. No. Regarding the wholesome and the unwholesome. When friends, a noble disciple understands the unwholesome and the fruit of the unwholesome, the wholesome and the root of the wholesome, in that way he is one of right view, whose view is straight, whose view is unwavering, who has unwavering confidence in the Dharma and has arrived at this true Dharma. And what, friends, is the unwholesome? What is the root of the unwholesome? What is the wholesome? What is the root of the wholesome? Killing living beings is unwholesome. Taking what is not given is unwholesome. Misconduct and sensual pleasures is unwholesome. False speech is unwholesome. Malicious speech is unwholesome. Harsh speech, gossip, covetousness is unwholesome. Ill will is unwholesome. Wrong view is unwholesome. This is called unwholesome. And what is the root of the unwholesome? Greed is the root of the unwholesome. Hate is the root of the unwholesome. Delusion is a root of the unwholesome. This is called the root of the unwholesome. And in another sutta, which I won't read here, he talks about, those same skillful actions and kind of how to test them out for yourselves. He keeps questioning the monks that he's talking to, what do you think? So if, a man is covetousness of another man's wife, and what do you think? Is that skillful or unskillful? Will that lead to harm or not harm? And so, emphasizing that, we're not just strictly relying on the blind faith of the teachings and just following the letter of the teachings themselves, that we can work this out on our own, kind of once we get going. And the hope is that if a Buddhist starts, if an aspirant starts off at this level, the mundane level, he's kind of giving enough to pique interest and to let the aspirant see, wow, I tried some of these things, these skillful actions and that sort of thing, and seems to be improving my life. I want to know more. And that'll lead to kind of the transcendent end of things. So, but the two kind of major aspects under this particular level of right view are karma and rebirth. So karma is this idea that our intentions and the actions that stem from them kind of lead to results. We have, kind of the fruit of our actions. You reap what you sow. We know from other religions, right? We hear that, but not so literally. And I didn't realize that this was so spelled out. This is actually, we arrive at with Buddha Master some of this understanding. I hear Panyawati talk like this as well. But, I think there have been a lot of views of karma. I practiced meditation in my 20s, and there were certain views of karma that I thought I understood. And it almost seemed like you needed to run out your old karma and just have the good karma left, or rely on some mechanism to sort of burn up the bad karma. Maybe that was in those days, it was something called Kundalini. But here, the Buddha uses the analogy of a field planted with seeds. So some seeds are ready to sprout, others are not. What's happening right now is a measure of which seeds are currently sprouting. So we right now have a collection of good and bad karma there, kind of, that's ours, that somehow is ours. And what's happening right now in this room is a measure of kind of what's ripening for each of us right now. And everyone's having a different sort of karma ripening right now. Other seeds may be waiting for the right conditions to sprout and may, be subjectively either good or bad. The truth is, and this is probably, part of what we call impermanence, is the idea that, some tragedy could befall any of us right now or at any moment as some old karma ripens. It can explain why, bad things seem to happen to good people. Why does that happen? And vice versa. But they talk about how a skillful change of heart can soften the effects of past unskillful actions. So and the Buddha talked about this in a particular sutta, that as we, so if we're in a state of ignorance and just sort of acting out of, like just the way the Buddha saw, wow, it's purely acting out of suffering, not aware that we're suffering, performing skillful and unskillful actions. Then as our karma ripens, it could affect us in good or bad ways, but we don't seem to have much influence on that. But as we pursue a path like this and we begin to develop discernment and skillful actions and train our minds that way, then sometimes when old karma arises, we can treat it differently. We can react to it differently, and the outcome can be different. So karma is not this thing where we did something bad in the past, and man, I'm just waiting for that thing to hit. And maybe something I don't know about from previous lives. That as we're walking this path of kind of skillfulness and transforming our minds towards a more skillful way of living, that even when some of that does bear fruit, we can make different choices at that time. That was heartening. It seems almost like a contemporary view of Buddhism, but it's in a sutta that we know comes from sometime, in the BC time period, right? So pretty advanced in his view of some of this stuff, I thought, or I'm finding. So our experience of karmic results can depend on our state of mind at the time. This is from a particular sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya. I don't want to carry all these books in here. I know they're up there, but it says, small-hearted and lacking in virtue and discernment, and pleasure and pain can empty your mind and remain. So in other words, we're susceptible. I like this, I don't like this, right? All that aversion. We haven't developed the skill to kind of get beyond that yet. The ripening of unskillful actions will be painful. Large-hearted and trained in virtue and discernment, pleasure and pain cannot empty your mind and remain. The effects of unskillful actions from the past will be barely felt. And he likens it to like a salt cube. If you took a salt cube and put it in a glass of water, the water becomes unpotable. You wouldn't drink that. But if you put that same salt cube in a river, you could still drink that water. So that's the analogy that he uses. So we can train ourselves to develop more skillful states of mind, both to produce skillful actions now and to ameliorate the unskillful karma of the past. And this is how we can eventually be released from karma altogether. So, I think most recently I have from the Buddha Master that in the teachings that we have there, that when we reach this state of release or enlightenment, however we want to refer to it, that we're released from the influence of samsara, the cycle of rebirth, and karma. We don't have to wait for it to expire. We simply go beyond it. Isn't that encouraging? So essentially, that's how the path at the end. That's how the path to the end of suffering is intended to work. Is that eventually we're released from the very things that are causing us suffering, and that's how the path is supposed to bring us. What the path is supposed to bring us to. So then there's rebirth, and again, this is at the level of, do I have this? Do I believe this? Can I accept this? Right? This is the mundane level, and these are the things in it. So rebirth, beings can be reborn to higher or lower realms of existence based upon their ripening karma. Rebirth for humans can correspond to a mix of kind of ripening karmic seeds, could result in different levels of beauty, wealth, power, lifespan, status, depending on the relative lack or abundance of the seeds of generosity, virtue, goodwill, ripening in the bag. The Buddha talked about where rebirth can happen, but didn't discuss, at least as far as any of the sort of the record that's available, what gets reborn or by what mechanism the results of our actions carry over from one lifetime to another. There's some suggestion that, he did talk about how rebirth happens as a process, that acts of consciousness are sustained by craving as they move from one state to the next. We're responsible for that process. So he kind of leaves us with that process and enough, right? Enough for today, the things that I can work on today. That's enough for us to work on right there. We have the process. If we affect that process, then no need to know, kind of the rest. So we're responsible for this process. It's something we can affect and even end by following the Eightfold path. So that's mundane right view. Those are the constituents of it. I'll give you an example. How are we doing on time? Not too bad. I'll give you an example. When I think it was the second year that I was coming here, Master Zizi, who some of us know, Panyawadi's master from the West Coast, was making a visit to Hendersonville. Before she came, Panyawadi and Panyadeepa gave us a retreat. And during that retreat, and it was to expose us to some of the teachings of Vajrayana, and specifically to specific teachings of the Buddha master, who's Master Zizi's master, and it's called the Dharma of cultivation. Now, I'd known enough by that time about the Buddha and kind of who he was purported to be, and I thought, well, he seems like an important teacher in the world. So when they had this retreat, I went. As we started going through this teaching, I realized, oh, wow, there's a lot of focus on reincarnation here. I had that on the shelf for years. So here I'm sitting here, this new Buddhist, who's loving coming to Dharma talks with Panyawadi because it all makes sense. She's not necessarily hammering on any of this, right? Rebirth or anything. It's not necessarily hammering on any of that. It's really just all makes sense. It's great psychology there. It's something I can use. I come back for more. So that's the level I'm at, right? I haven't even really, Buddhism is interesting and I'm becoming more interested in it. I'm kind of at that mundane level, but I haven't fully adopted rebirth. I kind of had it on the shelf. So I say this because it is important to, when we talked earlier, that there is a belief system for any different, religious path. And we should see that the path matches up to what we can handle, what we can tolerate. And so I didn't have it with reincarnation at the time. And if you've read this text, I know many of you in this room have, you can't pass a page or more. You couldn't pass 2 pages without running into the word reincarnation or renunciation, which is the desire to surpass reincarnation. So, you just couldn't get past it. So here I am, and this is what I'm running into. Now, I considered this an important teaching. I considered the Buddha master an important teacher. Out of the retreat, we were to practice, contemplate these ideas. And there were certain sections that we could do that with. And so I wanted to do that. And I did. And there's 8 views that he outlines in order of importance: impermanence, a firm belief in the danger of impermanence, and then renunciation was the firm conviction to leave the cycle of reincarnation. Well, when I originally started contemplating those ideas, I kind of turned it into my own thing. That renunciation was, letting go of stuff and whatnot. I'm actively contemplating this on a daily basis, how I'm practicing. And then at some point I went back and kind of read through the text again. I started to sort of go through, and, I've got this reincarnation still on the shelf. And it says, thus, if you want to have this true state of mind that is determined to leave the cycle of renunciation, you must first understand impermanence. The second step is have a mind of firm belief. you must firmly believe in the sufferings of reincarnation, which has as its source impermanence. Only with such a mind of firm belief will you fear the sufferings caused by impermanence and successfully attain a state of mind that truly fears impermanence. You know, glory days, blissful days back in the 20s, we're no fear, everything's bliss, right? We meditate, we're leaving this thing, Kundalini's going to take care of it all, right? That's what we have. And now we're back into this sort of fear. And so having attained a state of mind that truly fears impermanence, your state of mind that is determined to leave the cycle of reincarnation will grow stronger day by day. Naturally, your state of mind that is determined to leave the cycle of reincarnation will enter a real state that truly fears impermanence. If living beings don't understand that all conditional dharmas in the universe are impermanent, if they don't understand the sufferings connected with reincarnation and impermanence, then they cannot establish a firm mind that gives rise to thoughts leaving the cycle of reincarnation. If you've never thought about leaving the cycle of reincarnation, you will not cultivate at all, and you will not learn Buddhism. This is what I'm faced with. So But kidding aside, so the last thing is to really make you laugh. So now we have, you know, there are 2 sets of 7 branches, things to contemplate, and that's what I was trying to practice that as well. Here's the first one: understanding who my mother is. I deeply understand that all living beings in the 6 realms of reincarnation within the 3 spheres of the universe have since beginningless time been my fathers and mothers in the revolving cycle of reincarnation. Bearing in mind kindness, I should deeply bear in mind that all of my parents and all living beings that now exist in the cycle of reincarnation have since beginningless time given birth to me, reared me, loved me, became tired and ill for me. Their kindness to me is as heavy as a mountain. I should bear in mind their kindness. I will then regard the suffering of my parents as all, right? I mean, my parents have given me anything. They're now revolving and wandering in the 6 realms of reincarnation. So you see what I was faced with. Now, I think my desire, I think that maybe, how do you say, not desire, genuine desire, to take these teachings seriously and to be able to practice them and to cultivate. I love the idea of cultivation. Kind of, well, let's give this reincarnation thing a second chance. And it just so happened, you know, I think, you know, through that desire, through that sort of genuine kind of maybe, you know, need for something to give there, I started to run into podcasts, books, television shows, somehow that touched on. I listened to a talk by Ajahn Brahm, and it wasn't about this. It just happened to be a talk he was giving, and I was interested because it was another topic I was interested in. He was talking about, and he just kind of blandly said, "Hey, you know, this whole reincarnation thing, please. I mean, there's books, like there's millions of books about this. People have written books about studying the, you know, they follow the kids that remember their past lives. They follow them. They can point out there's all kinds of evidence for this if you just look for it. If you just look at it, there's no real discrepancy about this reincarnation thing." So eventually, through, you know, through various mechanisms, I did come around to sort of, now it's the only thing that makes sense to me. I mean, this idea that, you know, in my, you know, prior religious, you know, life that I was going to, you know, somehow either just burst into nothingness, which was whatever, you know, we were left with kind of in my 20s, and or, you know, kind of go to heaven and hang out. None of that makes any sense to me anymore. I mean, so, you know, I've completely arrived. I'm here. I love this book. There's nothing in this book that I can't, although I will say that I'm still working on a genuine fear of impermanence, right? We contemplate this each morning when we do our Mahamudra liberation practice, some of us. And I'm still working on having that genuine fear. I'm from the West. I mean, we're going to live forever, and nothing bad's going to happen to us. That's kind of the mindset that we have. So that I have. But he's talking about motivation with that, and it's important. So that's why I wanted to stress that, you know, there are these beliefs in any spiritual path, and we have to come to find a way to adopt them. Otherwise, they're a hindrance. So that reincarnation thing for me for several months was a real hindrance, and probably a year was a real hindrance until I finally kind of came around to it in my own way. I had to hear things in a certain way, and, you know, I kind of came around to it. So that brings us to transcendent right view, right? So this is now where the Buddha says, gotcha. Now we're going to move the teachings from kind of people and things, worlds and you know, ramifications and skillful actions and, you know, things that every religion has. And we're going to move you up into the mind. And we're going to show you what's behind all this and how you can really kind of, you know, affect change. So this is where the Four Noble Truths are introduced. And the Four Noble Truths are the kind of the products of the Buddha's awakening. It's what he saw. You know, he became enlightened, then he looked out and he saw, wow, I know what freedom is. These people are not free. I see that as suffering. They don't know they're suffering. Teaching. So he saw people chasing, you know, endless attachments, trapped in cycles of rounds of birth and death. Bringing the teachings up into the mind now, the faculty of, you know, discernment. We're going to be able to now to start to see the world through the lens of the Dharma. We'll be able to kind of direct ourselves more. It's no longer just a matter of faith and conviction, just things we believe. We're going to be able to kind of see this and work it out for ourselves. So the transcendent right view teachings are focused on our thoughts, our speech, our actions, and how those cause and end suffering. Brings us to the Four Noble Truths, which take kind of a diagnostic approach to the issue of suffering. You have the symptoms of the disease, which is suffering. You have the origination of the causes of those symptoms. We have that it's possible to cure the disease. And the course of treatment, of course, is the Noble Eightfold Path. And the origin of suffering is defined as in three types of things. One is the craving for sensuality. The other is the craving for becoming. And the other is the craving for non-becoming. We'll talk about that. So with the craving for sensuality, we have, you know, kind of the mind's fascination with planning and fantasizing about pleasures of sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations. We'll let the Buddha make it clear. This is called renunciation of sensuality. There are these 5 strings of sensuality. Which 5? Forms cognizable via the eye, agreeable, pleasing, charming, endearing, enticing, linked to sensual desire, sounds cognizable via the ear, aromas cognizable via the nose, flavors cognizable via the tongue, tactile sensations cognizable via the body, agreeable, pleasing, charming, endearing, enticing, linked to sensual desire. But these are not sensuality. They're called the objects of sensuality in the discipline of the noble ones. And then there's some verse. The passion for his resolves is a man's sensuality, not the beautiful sensual pleasures found in the world. The passion for his resolve is a man's sensuality. The beauties remain as they are in the world, while the wise in this regard subdue their desire. So the world is beautiful, but it's our craving for more and more and our inability to just sort of see the beauty, appreciate it, move on, that is a cause for suffering, at least in this one aspect of sensuality. There's one other sutta I was going to read if I had time. I'm going to save that for Dharma contemplation on Thursday since I'm on. That'll be handy. Okay. And then there's craving for becoming. So this is assuming an identity in a particular world of experience for the purposes of enjoying some object of our desire. And we'll let the Buddhists tell us about that as well. In which craving is the ensnarer that has flowed along, spread out, and caught hold, with which this world is smothered and enveloped like a tangled skein, a knotted ball of string, like matted rushes and reeds, and does not go beyond transmigration, beyond the plains of deprivation, woe, and bad destinations. These 18 craving verbalizations, dependent on what is internal, and 18 craving verbalizations dependent on what is external. And which are the 18 craving verbalizations depending on what is internal? There being I am, there comes to be I am here. There comes to be I am like this. There comes to be I am otherwise. I am bad. I am good. I might be here. I might be like this. I might be otherwise. May I be here. May I be like this. May I be otherwise. I will be here. I will be like this. I will be otherwise. These are the 18 craving verbalizations dependent on what is internal. And which are the 18 craving verbalizations dependent on what is external? There being I am because of this or by means of this. There comes to be I am here because of this. There comes to be I am like this because of this. I'm bad because of this. I'm good because of this. I might be because of this. I might be here because of this. I might be like this because of this. I might be otherwise because of this. I might be because of this. May I be here because of this? May I be like this because of this? May I be otherwise? I will be otherwise because of this. I will be here because of this. I will be like this because of this. I will be otherwise because of this. These are the 18 craving verbalizations dependent on what is internal. So you get this idea of what is becoming. It's anytime we desire an object or we assume an identity around kind of the acquisition of something in the world of experience. And the way they describe it is that we're literally creating a world to inhabit so that we can pursue this thing. You know, we desire pizza. We're going to create now a world that we live in that we are getting pizza. That's our identity, is becoming the guy getting pizza. And then I pursue that pizza, and then maybe when it's done, I'm the guy that's now not doing that anymore. I move on to another desire, and now I'm the person doing that. So it's called becoming, and it's this craving for becoming that we just really moving from one desire and one becoming to the next throughout an entire lifetime. And that's what the Buddha saw. He kind of looked out and went, wow, look at how these people are living, you know, compared to what I'm seeing, you know, in this current state that I have. Wow, look at how these people are living. They're chasing their tails. And then they die and they have to do it all over again. So it's just amazing, right? So there's some, you know, technical aspects to this, right? We have large scale becoming, which is like, you know, we're here, we were born, there's birth, there's death, there's this kind of large scale becoming, or small scale, like, you know, I'm going to get the pizza, you know, we start in our mind and we go out. Whenever we start a becoming in our mind and then we act on it, hey, I think something's happening with so-and-so, and then we decide to pick up the phone and call, now we've acted on it. We've brought that becoming from kind of the inside world to the outside world, and karma, right? Now we're interacting in the world of acting on it. Now karma can come into play. And this goes on and on. It could be endless. And that's why even the cycle of birth and death is based on this kind of becoming. Sue and I just, retired recently, and we're familiar with the idea of, competing desires at the same time, right? Can have us kind of straddling, competing inner worlds. I wrote multitasking, but that can really be a very common form of suffering. And I can feel that. I can feel that, maybe I had a tennis clinic in the morning, and then I came home, and as soon as I got home, I needed to kind of maybe grab a snack and then sit down for a demonstration of the software that we sold at my job, right? So I'm switching from becoming the tennis person as I'm going to the tennis court, I'm becoming the tennis person and the funny guy on the court. And then all of a sudden I'm coming home and having to switch into becoming now Joe that knows all about this. And then after that, I'm going to switch to something else, right? So this, but if I'm maintaining multiple of these identities and having to either switch between them or actually literally multitask them, in supposed real time, I don't think there's any such thing. That's stressful, and we feel it. So, and the reason that it's stressful is because ultimately all becoming is impermanent, which inevitably leads to suffering. We really like this. We've had it for years. Now it's gone. It's just, this is just, and when we don't see that coming, there's disappointment. We see on the news all the time. People are very disappointed about things, and they love to show them crying about it on the news. Otherwise, they don't get ratings, I guess. Plenty of people laughing in the world, but we never see them. There's only one small segment at the end of the news. It's a 30-minute segment that says we're going to talk about something good. So, and then there's this craving for non-becoming. Well, what is that? Well, it turns out the desire to not become, even the desire to get beyond becoming, which is kind of what this path is all about, is a form of becoming. So if I'm going to be the one that ends something in my life, maybe I'm letting go of something, whatever, then I become the one that's doing that. And so, the destruction of any process, either on a large scale where we end a relationship or commit suicide, right? It's a form of becoming. We're becoming now that person, that identity. Or on a small scale, just letting go, some particular desire creates a new becoming. Now we're a destroyer. So there's a problem that arises when we think about the path, that this desire for non-becoming, as one who traverses the path, inevitably creates more becoming. Well, how do we ultimately obtain final release? Because we were kind of thinking that if we could not become anymore, then we would be good. Didn't know this before. The Buddhist solution is jhana meditation. The ability to observe the causal processes for becoming and non-becoming firsthand on a steady platform fosters kind of the tranquility and the insight, discernment, back to that discernment, to allow the processes of becoming to run out on their own. That's why the path is like a raft that has to be abandoned on reaching the further shore. And ultimately, that's ultimate right view, is that, we use the path, through the whole transcendent phase. We use the path, it got us all the way there, but now we've got to let go of the path. And that's the ultimate right view. And that's essentially, I guess, what the Buddha had when he kind of looked out and said, these people are not living right. So suffering. So that's what I had today. Would anyone like to share some, if something that was said, you said, oh, wow, or triggered something that you could add that would help everyone, or anything like that, or just a question? The question thing, I'm certainly, I know what I know so far, but yeah. Yeah, we've moved on.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much. I really want, if it's all right with you all, to talk a lot more about this becoming and not becoming. I really am confused. I was asking Joe if we could discuss that becoming and non-becoming in more depth, because it totally confuses me. I never did understand it, and I really don't understand it very well right now. I think it's a very deep concept and a very important one. And I feel I personally, I'm missing something big here.
Yeah. So the way they talk about it is that whenever we have a desire for something, for some object, that in order to acquire that object, we assume an identity to do that. And so literally we become that identity for that period of time. And it may be just a brief period of time. I reach over, I get this book. I assume an identity that goes now. I know which one I want. I have it. And I've acquired this thing that I wanted. I assumed it briefly. I assumed an identity. Now I turn back and I assume once again the identity of projecting whatever this talk is that I'm giving. And maybe if I need to use the restroom, I'm starting to become the person that needs to go to the restroom. So anytime that we approach or reach out for an object of sensuality, we have to assume an identity to acquire it and to have it. It shapes us. We become it in a way. We become an identity that has that. And so on a small scale, that's happening a million times, a minute in our minds. On a large scale, that's happening. You were born in this life. We'll die. That's non-becoming. Then we'll become again. And kind of that process can be, guided by karma. So there's something that is able to sort of take the mind stream that is right now stew and link it to the mind stream that might become whatever that mind stream becomes in the future. Whether it becomes something on the physical plane, on another plane, that would be the large scale becoming. But small scale becoming, it's what keeps us kind of on this hamster wheel of chasing desires and pleasures and assuming identities to enjoy those.
I'll just say something. So a couple of things are coming up for me. Okay. I hope I didn't interrupt, but I just want to drive something home.
Sure.
So you keep talking about these identities, around becoming. So let's drive it home a little bit. What do the identities that we derive, right, that we play? We fulfill roles all the time. Why does that get in the way? What is that preventing me, to experience? Is it the higher self? I mean, why are the identities an issue, number one? So just a rhetorical question out there. And the second one is just to drive it home personally. I'm a mother. During empty nest, it was difficult for me to let go of my son, for example. If I kept holding on to that identity as a mother, I wouldn't allow myself to experience what it feels like to be in my 60s, trying to learn to become more awakened or to have a beautiful heart. If I hold on so tight during my retirement that I'm a program director with all of that, then it wouldn't allow me to transition into this new state, and I'm out of the flow. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's the way I'm driving home these concepts. You're so abstract. I sometimes struggle with applying them in a very personal, heartfelt way. So I just wanted to offer you that, Stu. Being a mother, being a program director, how do I shift out of those identities? And what is it, by clinging to these identities, what is it preventing me from? So
yeah. And that's the root of it. I think you just answered the question, Sue. It's the clinging, it's the attachment that causes the suffering. that, the origination of any of this is impermanent by nature. Anything in samsara is impermanent. So by that fact, then anything we cling to is ultimately impermanent and will cause us suffering by losing it. So, and that's the same with these identities. When we cling to them, when we attach to them, when we seek to protect them, when someone seeks to attack it, all of this is the suffering we see all around us in the world. And so the Buddha saw that as a root cause for suffering.
No, I want to give this to you.
Oh, take it. And now can we talk about the non-becoming?
So the
flip side.
non-becoming is just tearing down a becoming. Yeah, or stopping one. So if I have for years and years prided myself on a certain way of being, in this path, we talk a lot about letting go. We see maybe our flaws or our foibles or some identity that we're managing and we have been for years. Maybe it came from our conditioning growing up, right? And we see maybe the error in it and we want to end that identity. We want to dissociate from that identity. And if we're successful in doing so, that's a non-becoming.
Some time ago, thank you. Some time ago, I realized that I wanted to give up all of my labels. And I realized that when somebody says you go in a meeting and you meet new people and they say, "Who are you? Tell us about yourself." Well, I'm this and this and this and this. And I realized that every one of those degrees, my resume, the accomplishments, the degrees, the certificates, the awards, that each one of those was a box. And that if I said, well, I am this, I was a operating room nurse, for example. Now I have to act like that. I have to present myself as somebody who was capable of and smart enough and experienced enough and had that wisdom to be an operating room nurse. And in the process, I decided I don't want any of that anymore. And I literally mentally, if I came into a room now and people said, "Who are you?" I would say, "Good question." Been working on that all my life. And I literally would probably exasperate some people, but I'm no longer going to share any of it unless there's some reason, some good reason to do that. And I did. I actually hid certain things in my house that were proof of who I was. And I had, and it's in I even wrote poetry about it. I had an explosion of freedom. And it was like fireworks going off. And it was just like this great festival of freedom. And I literally feel I am this, there's no limits to who I am, but there's no labels. It's like, and what I discovered is less is more. And I've maintained it. I mean, it wasn't just one of those great meditation days. It's for real in me now. I am so much more, but I can't tell you what that is. And it's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's freeing.
That's wonderful.
So I think that's relates to what you're saying.
Reminding, what it it's starting to feel like for me is I find that whenever I project an identity or want to tell somebody, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, I have this, this is what makes me great today, right now, tennis court, whatever it is, I get, if there's 8 people on the tennis court, I'll get one from each of their retort to that, right? Oh, and you should hear this. And so less is more, right? I mean, less is more. The more I'm learning not to attach to these various identities that I want to be proud of or have someone else be proud of or that sort of thing. The less I'm kind of interrupting the flow of the world and giving people things to trigger off of that then consume them. So how can I control the suffering of the world? By removing myself more from it, from that kind of interaction, which is futile and endless, as the Buddha discovered, I think. Thank you. Your question. May all beings be well and happy. May all beings learn to walk a path that helps them to be released ultimately from suffering. Thank you all.
Thank you, Joe.